this idea of soybean profitability, and I think we had a good foundation this morning with Emerson and Shaun and Matt's discussion as well. So thinking about, what are some decisions that we need to make to be profitable? This idea of being an automatic drive or manual is really going down that road. Are we just in the autopilot, if you will, of making recommendations or making decisions that are just what we've always done? Or are we shifting gears? Okay, so how many haul a truck and a trailer? Have a truck they haul a trailer with? Any in the crowd? Okay. How many of those are an automatic drive? You got a few? How many are the manual drives? All right, so why is Harold? All right, good. I get to pick on Harold. That's good. Well, why do you have a manual drive? You cheap? Is that the main reason?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other reason to have a manual drive and haul a trailer?
For me, I think so.
Which is?
The transmission will stand up better to those heavy ones.
Okay, so the ability to kind of make the decision of downshifting when he needs to hold up to the heavier loads. I grew up in flat black ground. All right, I'm a flatlander from Illinois, good prairie dirt. And I spent a summer up in Wisconsin as an internship back in the day, and they taught me a thing about gearing down. Right? There's hills and hollers, and you gear down so that you use the gears to kind of slow things up. Or if you want to pass someone, you can really drop it down. Whereas that automatic drive, it can kind of slug on you, right? Really what I'm driving at is to have the ability to be flexible, to make the decision that's going to be most profitable, all right? Going to manual drive is what I'm talking about, all right? A lot of times you can also think about, I had a Camaro that I bought when I was a senior in high school. It was a 5-speed. And I loved it because I could have control. I could have as much power as I wanted, and goosing it or going around a corner. Got great gas mileage. And, second day of work at Purdue. So it takes 10 minutes to get an introduction going. All right, so second day at Purdue, back in 2009 when I started, I still had this Camaro. I'm an extension agronomist, right? I'm cheap. But I loved the car and had it. I got rear-ended. That's how Purdue welcomed me. And so I miss it, but the opportunity to shift gears and to really make the best decisions is what we're talking about today. So, all right, let's get into it. We've got this yield, all right? You could cross that out and put profitability. Harold, I think, made a comment earlier today that what are some decisions or options that we can do to increase production, which would thereby help our profitability, assuming that it had a good ROI, right? Or what are there just straight recommendations where we can be most profitable? So I'll ask it, what are some of the decisions that you target to be most profitable / productive in soybeans? What are you looking at? I'll ask him for you, Harold. Are you adding nitrogen to soybeans to be profitable? Okay, so Emerson had an impact this morning. All right, I'll tell him that. So what else are you looking at? Come on now.
Better say variety selection.
Variety selection. Come on, I'm not the 320. That's Laura. You can be bone quiet for her, right? Herbicide program. All right, so Mark has an impact now. Seed treatments. Think about you got Phytophthora, if you've got some of the SDS, or you got some other issues going on. What else? You're starting to warm up now. Cutting seeding rates, so the profitability. So still being able to be productive, but cut the amount of seed cost that goes into that. Fungicide, if you've got those those pressures that are coming out there. We've got frog eye leaf spot. You got issues that are coming up. What about planting date? Narrow rows. So I'll just kind of buzz through these, right? All these come into play as factors that affect your yield, right? And there's more than this, but this is just a few to really take the top few, all right? Affecting yield, affecting profitability. And really what it comes down to is just flat out being intentional, being purposeful, trying to figure out what really makes the most sense, okay? So here's just one example. I could give a whole talk just on variety selection, and I have, but here's just one slide from our 2015 trial. We had an irrigated dryland scenario, eight different varieties, all right? And so just looking at this one alone, so that's up in our, let me see where the laser is on this guy. Okay. So this is up on our Northwest farm. So a 2.8 to 3.4 maturity, right? So just looking at this one slide, which variety you're going to select? If this is your kind of farm, this kind of field conditions that you guys farm. 3.3A, and then I heard someone say any of them, and that's because I have no stats on it, right? Okay, so good. I'm glad to hear that. Let's assume that the highest is the highest. All right, now let's go down that road. The 3.3A, right? Unless somebody is just that guy or gal that goes to the pet store and looks at that pitiful little dog and says, you know, I've got to find a home for you. You're the runt, right? You know, no one's going to say, I want to buy the runt here, the 3-1. Right? I'm going to echo, it's kind of surprising, I'm going to echo a fair number of comments that Conley made this morning about the high to the low is what we're driving at. You know, within variety trials, 15, 20 bushels are easily seen between the high to the low. Now, this one trial, we go from, it's not quite as big of a spread. We only have 8 varieties for this study, though. 59 bushel up to 66. So at this point, you're saying the 3.3A, 66 bushel, that's the one I'm picking. And then we could cross that out and say it's 2014, 15, and 16 data and 5 locations, and you start to have a little bit more, comfortable in this, right? A little more confidence. Now, before I go on to the irrigated set, which variety are you going to select if you run irrigation? How many are going to select the same 3.3A? Raise hands. No. You guys know that I do trick questions, right? So which one are you going with? 3.4B. All right, why are you going that route? I like critical thinking. I like explanation. Longer season, so you got water, so we're going to keep them going. It's actually the complete opposite. Right? So it's the 2.9 that I was playing out. This 2.9, 76 bushels now with the irrigation. The irrigation, again, we don't have a lot of irrigated ground, but you get the Michiana corridor, and you guys catch a little bit here and there. We do have some irrigated ground. All we put out was maintaining evapotranspiration. So during reproduction, so R3, so that's when we start to turn on these pivots. R3, the first pod, through dropping the leaves. All right, we're maintaining ET, and we put in 5 inches of irrigation during that time. All right, so if you want to think about profitability, you often think about being efficient, right? Being most cost efficient. So another way to look at this is which one's most cost efficient in terms of the water supply, right? If you go back to, I'll go back a slide. So this 3.3A was 66 bushel, right? 20 inches of rain probably for the growing season, give or take. That's the most efficient. So you're kind of going through that same thought process that, well, surely that's going to be the most efficient in this setup. No, you add 5 bushel for 5 inches. All right, so it's 1 bushel per inch. Now you go to that 2.9A, or 2.9, excuse me, it's a 15 bushel swing. So what's the efficiency there? 3. All right, people, you don't do Common Core math over here, do you? So you got that one figured out. Maybe you do. Maybe that's how you got it figured out. All right, so efficiency, you got 3 bushel per inch, so it's pretty efficient. Now, what would be nice is if we had a large acreage that had irrigation and to have this scenario so then you know how they perform. We could have put another factor of management. I just happen to use water management. It could be planting date. All right, it could be fungicide. It could be a few other things that have an interaction with fungicide. Interaction with variety. And so to understand that, I've got varieties that respond linearly, a linear decrease from the first week of May down in yield, whereas others are kind of holding off until the 15th, 20th of May, then they drop off. All right, so having that knowledge is really going to help in the profit and bottom line. So this idea is just to understand how they perform across a number of environments as well as your management scenario. So this is just kind of that for instance. All right. Because I can't be long-winded, I go and put some of the take-homes up front. All right. 2017, our trials have been 6 to 12 bushel. Again, Conley made the comment up to 15 or 20 bushel yield swings just in variety selection alone. Okay. Again, doing our homework, picking the varieties that have the yield potential as well as the yield consistency is what we're talking about. Okay. How do they perform over dry environments? How do they perform over different soil types? Start to pull out some of that data. Timely planting, I'll get into the whys of this a little bit. This is very conservative, 4 to 8 bushel yield difference just for going from May 15th until about the 25th, 30th of May. Very conservatively, that's 4 to 8 bushel loss. And again, there's going to be areas where it's even more than that. People will make the comments, well, I'll just do in-season management to recoup those losses, and it never happens. You're never able to recoup that loss that you've lost the potential straight away. Okay, we'll get into some of that. Seed treatment, fungicide, I do think that's a good place to be, especially if we're planting timely, cool, wet soils. Again, if you've got the soil types that have had issues, the fields that have had those issues with Phytophthora. We had a fair number of seedling diseases last year dampening off, so certainly we want to look at that. I'm not going to get into any specific AIs on this. I've yet to see seed insecticide treatment play out. Continue to look at it. I've yet to see it play out. So I want to think about profitability. All right, insecticides really don't play. Now it comes down to the marketing side of things. Well, you can have the insecticide for another couple bucks, right? And so you've got to do those discussions. Agronomically, I've yet to see it play out. Okay, how long are some of the activity of these insecticide seed treatments? Any ideas?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. You know, they claim 30 to 45 days in many cases. All right, so as far as actual activity, Krupke over at Purdue, it's upwards of maybe 10 days, 14 days. All right, so regardless of 10 or 14 days, or it's 45 days, let's say it lasts 45 days. You plant May 1, that gives you activity until the middle of June, right? When are insects coming in? Really, truly, when are insects coming in for soybeans for us? July, maybe. If, knock on wood, I'll stamp on wood here. Aphids haven't been a problem for a while. Bean leaf beetles, stink bugs, all that coming in, that's going to be much later. If you are the first one at the buffet table, okay, you are the first one planted in your county, yeah, you're going to have some of the bean leaf beetle feeding, but it's not going to be at high enough levels, really, to cause economic yield loss, okay? So again, just trying to think about where you can save some money. Insecticide seed treatments is one that you can cut. All right. Seed rates. I've been at that same 100, 120,000 plants. You're plenty good. You don't need to be any more than that. I'll go and show some of the data that actually gives us even more cushion than that 100,000. Okay, and these are field scale trials, so we'll get into that. And then really it comes down to just knowing what's going on, making the adjustments, going in to downshifting, or go ahead and put it in overdrive and coast for a little bit until the next problem arises. All right, so we'll go down the route of seeding rates. All right, so we've done them. I've done field scale trials since 2010. I felt like this was a good year to kind of bring it back up again. I got calls last winter. Shaun, can I seed at 100,000? Well, sure. Do you want to? Can you? Should you? Right? I mean, maybe you guys are asking that same question. Can I? Should I seed at 100,000? All right, let's go down this road. This is 50,000 seeding rate, so we get the full range, right? We'll go as low as 50,000, and we'll go on about 50,000 increments, or 40, depends on the trial, up to 250,000 seeds. Okay, we'll catch the full range. All right, this is 50,000 seeding rate. It's with the John Deere 750 drill, no-till conditions. This is actually up near Columbia City, so not too far away from here. All right, very similar soils that you guys run. Either side is seeding rates of 200,000, so this is about the middle of June, so obviously it's pretty gappy. That's not something that you want, but it gives you an idea. We're talking field scale trials. We're not talking my 10-foot by 50-foot plots, okay? Let's go down this road. Seed rate, seed quality, variety, white mold, obviously, if that's an issue you want to think about dropping off. Equipment, when I came to Purdue in 2009, we had different seeding rates for 7.5-inch, 15-inch, 30-inch rows, right? So what was the logical next step being said about seeding rates and row widths? Right? If you got a 30-inch row, seeding recommendation maybe was 120,000 or so, right? You go to 15-inch, they'd bump it up to maybe 155. You go up to down to 7.5-inch rows, seeding rate recommendations were what, 180, 200, right? So the idea comes across that as row width narrows, you need to increase your seeding rate. It's nothing to do with the row width. It's to do with the equipment that's planting those row widths. Okay? We'll get into that. Soil conditions. So again, seed rate will change, but the target will not. The target plant stand will not change. So here it is. Target 100 to 120,000 plants. Again, this has a lot of cushion. Planters. So this is how this is different now. I've kind of brought it back to the equipment, the iron that's putting it down in the ground. So planters, 15-inch, 30-inch, it don't matter to me, 20s, twin 30s, 120, 140,000 seeding rate. Okay? That'll get you there. Air seeder, or anything similar, so delivery mechanism maybe not quite as good, right? Metering it down the row. Maybe depth control isn't quite as good. So I'll bump that seeding rate recommendation 140 to 160. Honestly, probably just going to 150 is good enough on that kind of scenario. Drills, okay, yeah, so less than 10 inches or whatever it is. It's going to up again, right? It's 160 to 180. Right, if you got SI metering units or something else, you can kind of say, okay, it's a little bit more well calibrated than our fluted cup or our semi-controlled spill. But if you plant with drills and if you got seed on top of the ground, you're like, okay, I'm probably pretty good on my seed depth, right? If you ain't got any seed on top of the ground, what are you doing with the drill? You're burying it, right? So regardless, you got to put a lot more seed out there. Either get them up because you put them down to 2 to 3 inches. Or you have some on top of the ground, some just right, and some a little bit deep, right? So that's why we're changing the seeding rates. It's based on the equipment and their capacities to seed it down the row as well as with seed depth and metering, okay? I dare say if you've got better field conditions, you can probably even fine-tune this a little bit more. Standing a month or two out from planting, who knows, maybe some people will start planting next week. Frost-seeded beans, that sounds like a good project, Harold. But the idea of knowing the field conditions as you get closer and the following week or two, you might be able to start shaving a little bit more here and there, okay? If you bring in the fungicide seed treatment, again, that's another place where, okay, I can drop a little bit because I know I get a little bit better stands in those scenarios, okay? All right, so here I want to bring a little economics to it, just kind of the idea of, I know plenty of folks that are still seeding at 175, 180,000. With 15-inch planters. Okay, that's awfully strong, right? I think comfortably they can drop it 50,000. That's a strong drop, going from 175 to 125. But if there were to go down to that road, $50, $60 unit bag, 70s, and some of these, basically we're looking at $24 of savings just on an acre basis there alone. Our ag economist said, Shaun, get away from this acre business and put it on a per bushel basis, so that's where I'm going next. Based on the crop budget out of Purdue, low being 42, 52, medium, 62 yields. I said that's not high enough. I want some 72s in there. So, 10 bushel increment change here based on what kind of productivity, what kind of soil you've got. Just a 20,000 seeding rate reduction. Okay, that's maybe a little bit more palatable for some people. Let's pick the $60 unit bag and average yielding field 52. That's 15-cent savings, okay, per bushel. Some of our economists say I need to make up about 60 cents per bushel, Shaun, for us to be black, okay, to be in the black. We need 60 cents. So like, all right, I'll get you half of it right there, all right? Again, knowing that I've got a number of people that are still 180,000 seeding rate with 15-inch planters or something similar, dropping it down to 140, you're not losing anything. You're not losing anything in terms of yield potential, and the savings in the seed on a per bushel basis is 30 cents. Okay? So again, just trying to think about this profit and production. All right? So let's go and bring some of the data that's in the background of this. It's fun to kind of give you the recommendation, but let's go ahead and show how low you can go. So we've done it since 2010, field scale trials. I'm just going to bring in our Purdue farms. We've done it on farms as well, but I'm going to keep it within the Purdue system. So our Pinney farm is our northwest Indiana. Northeast is just across the state line over Columbia City. All no-till conditions. Tipping point here, we've got our 95% yield potential is how I'm breaking it off for you. And Pinney over all these years is breaking at 80,000. Okay. Was that crickets for me? Really? Golly, Laura, I hope they're better for you than me. No, it's not. Harold, where's the beer? Come on.
Go right now.
Go right now. All right, let's go. All right, so crickets are going. I can tell when I'm welcome. All right, are you a seed dealer, by the way? Is that what that was about? Okay. It probably was. All right, so our northeast farm kind of ticks over a little bit more, but again, it's at 110,000, right? That's where we've been for years, 120,000. But I want to kind of show you that, again, field scale trials, we can drop it to 80,000, 85,000, really no yield difference. Did it for a while, and I said, maybe there's something playing out with varieties. I have one location that's really, I think crickets were singing on this song. A couple more slides. They're going to be really mad at me. All right, so I decided to go down the route of different varieties, different plant types. And so trying to get to the idea, okay, I don't think we have a bushy bean anymore. I really don't think we have a slender bean anymore, but I still try to characterize based on a seed catalog. And so just getting a canopy width rating. So I picked whatever's the widest, so that's, quote, my bushy bean within the same maturity. And then whatever's less canopy width, quote, my slender. Okay? So we started that in 2015, did again in 16. I'm going to do one more year of this, again, field scale. Same farms. So the bushy is in black, and then the slender is in red. All right, let's go with the black. The quote, bushy bean, again, this is just a rough category. Tipping point, again, is about that 100,000. Okay? Do you see a red line at all? You see red dots, but do you see a red line? No. So what does that tell you? Emma, what does that tell you? No yield difference. From 45,000 plants to 200,000 plants. 45,000 plants to 200,000 plants, no yield difference. That's 3 site years on that. No crickets on that one. Okay, let's go on. Here's the site, the southeast farm. So this is our poorly drained. It's a fragipan-like soil. This can kind of catch a little bit of the Ohio types as well. Over near North Vernon. For 2 years in a row, when I first started it, the tipping point was 45,000 plants. That was a break point. Did that for 2 years. I didn't share it because I was like, oh, come on. I'll change the variety. We've done this study, our southeast farms in blue. Okay, tipping point, 45,000. Flat line after that. 7 site years. 7 years, that tipping point. Okay? So when I say 100, 120,000 plants, or Laura does, or Conley, there's a little bit of cushion. In some cases, there's a lot of cushion. Okay? So in a similar vein, if you get the calls, or you go out doing the plant stands, and it's 70,000 stand, don't touch the sucker, right? For a number of reasons, overseeding costs and everything else, but if you're just looking at yield potential and profitability, in a lot of cases, you're not going to catch any yield differences, regardless, right? Our Davis farm, so this is a Blount Pewamo type soil. So our east central, again, you can kind of start to go across state lines a little bit. Its tipping point is, again, is that 100,000 peaking out 120,000. Okay? So we brought in the Bushy and Slender, again, because that southeast farm really pushed me. And this goes a little bit more like you would think. A Bushy would probably potentially tip over a little bit earlier. Guess again, 50,000 tipping point. All right? And the slender bean maybe pushed it out a little bit more, 75 to 90,000. Okay? Yes, sir? Yeah, so I'll answer that and quickly say several things. I'm not advocating 50,000 plant stand, for one. All right? 2, because you're cutting trees, right? You got branch lodging, you got weed issues coming out. These plots did have weeds, right? We didn't do anything additional to it. It's whatever was there was there. Agronomically, what they could do. The height, certainly they are low. They're going to pod very low. You're going to have a lot of branches, so you've got that. So again, field scale equipment, those were still the yields that we're pulling off. So we know we missed pods still, is what I'm saying. We still missed pods because they were too low. They branched. We got branch lodging. So there was probably even more out there. But again, that's not my recommendation. What I'm saying is it gives you that flexibility that you know you can go low. Right? You know you can go 100,000, sub 100,000 in most of these fields and still not have any yield difference. Does that kind of get to the point of what you're asking? And I agree 100%. I don't want to see 50,000 plants out there. I really don't. I don't want to have weed issues continue to rise. But I'm just saying physiologically, agronomically, these beans can do it. Right? You need a shot vac, yeah. Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. Or that just becomes your new cover crop, right? Okay. Oh. Don't worry, they winter kill. All right, moving on. One of the greatest things I ever saw, so Bob Nielsen's my counterpart at Purdue, the corn agronomist, right? And so we were always ribbing each other. And so one of the greatest things I saw, I was walking with him in his field, and there's volunteer soybeans, and I was just loving life. All right, any questions on seeding rate before I go on?
Is
Okay, is it same for no-till or conventional till? All these trials were no-till, for one. Okay, all these trials were what I would call within the normal, May planting, some late April type. We did have a few years where you can't get in the field, right? That's just part of nature. You can't get into the first week of June, second week of June. We even had some July plantings. Those are not included in this set because they're an oddity, and so that is going to change the recommendation. Okay, if you think about tilled ground or something, strip till or anything like that, to warm it, maybe help out with a little bit earlier stand establishment, not having crusting, that number probably could go, well, stand establishment rates would probably increase, but the overall plant stand number, that target, probably still not changing, right? The seeding rate would change, though. Good question. Other questions? Okay. All right, timely planting. So this is one I hit on a lot last year across Indiana and the nation, and I'll do a few slides on this because, again, this is one of those areas where it doesn't cost us anything more than just being conscientious and thinking about what we want to do to increase our yields, to thereby increase our profitability. Okay? And so really what we're driving down, soybeans respond to heat units as well as photoperiod, right? Most of us think about soybeans are responding to what? Photoperiod, right? Day length. It's really actually the night length that causes the trigger, but I'll give you that sunlight, right? Very rarely do we talk about heat unit accumulation, right? But they're responding to both, right? And if you're planting timely, you're actually accumulating more heat units before you're getting that photoperiod to switch gears on you, right? So then you're gaining another node or two or three, right? You gain another 2, 3, 4 nodes. You also have the opportunity for more pods on those same nodes, okay? Some of the other take-homes on this is, you actually have branches that are reproductive branches. In other words, they actually have pods on them, not just vegetative branches, all right, if you plant timely. Reproductive duration is actually going to be longer. So you're in flowering, you're in pod development and seed fill, usually for a longer period of time. Calendar days, as well as heat units, as well as solar radiation, all right? And the other one is get it canopied, right? Our goal is to be green to the eye by the 4th of July, all right? We want those rows closed by the time we're hitting 4th of July, so roughly that should be equating to when we're flowering out the top. That's our goal, okay? Timely planting is going to help us get us there. Narrow rows, you think about seed rates, all come into play. Late April, early May is generally a sweet spot. Again, I'm talking about field conditions that are fit, right? I don't want people going in and just having open seed slots because it's April 25th. That doesn't do us any good. Yield loss potential, 3/10, 4/10 of a bushel per acre per day. That's usually that 15th, 20th of May for us and then drops off the cliff. Again, there are varieties that have that yield loss from week 1 of May. I have locations that have yield losses of 8/10 to 9/10 of a bushel per acre per day. Going from May 7th to May 21st, I've lost 12 bushels. All right, so kind of gives you that idea. This is just getting to the point that, if soybeans were just strictly photoperiod responsive, every one of these planting dates of the same variety would flower at the exact same time, right? But it has this floating scale as it goes through the early spring and early summer that it has to have some heat unit accumulation, photoperiods starting to come in, and so it has this kind of shifting requirement, if you will. So reaching R1, this is first bloom, we've got, these are March 30th, April 13th, so super early plantings. Again, that's not a recommendation, but you get the full range, right, to see how it responds. Our sweet spot, again, late April, early May, starting to flower around the 1st, 2nd of July. Within a couple days, we're flowering out the top. Again, we want that sucker canopied. That's our goal, right? Timely planting is going to help us get us there. You look at the later plantings, they're still pushing back into July, so the May 30th, first week of June. Okay? That's our goal, right? The one on the left is that 15-inch beam, planted timely. It's canopied. They're 95% pretty much there. By the time we're flowering out the top, you want to be harvesting that sunlight, putting it into the flowers, putting it in the pods, right? And starting to build that biomass factory. All right, what's happening on the 30-inch beam? This could happen on 15s too if they're planted late. But what's happening within there? All right, weeds. What else? Moisture loss, right? Kind of go through all that. You're wasting that energy. How many more days is it going to take for this 30-inch row to close? Sometimes it ain't going to happen, for one, if it's later plantings, right? Let's assume that they're both the first week of May. How many more days will it take for that sucker to close? How many think 7 days? No? Do I hear 10, 10, 10, 14, 14? Come on. 21? 25 days. Yeah. So this idea of trying to be efficient with one piece of equipment, 30-inch beans, versus, so you got one piece of equipment, that's fine, but you better make sure you're planting timely so you get that canopy closed, right? Otherwise, we're marking on about 10% yield reduction when we look at 30s versus 15s, okay? So a little bit more profitability, production side of things, okay? Before I got to Purdue, they did a kitchen sink study across a wide geography for 3 years, so very wide, and showing down to Louisiana all the way up to Minnesota. And just this, again, continue one more slide on this idea of 30-inch rows. Well, maybe I can just get out there with the irrigator. I'm not going to cause any wilt damage, and I'll just put more product out in season, right? That's the concept of doing this 30-inch row in one scenario. So wide rows, 30-inch beans, controlled naked seed, planted, 54 bushel. Again, nothing to write home about as far as high yield, for one. But let's just look at the incremental change. So 54 bushel over all these environments over 3 years, 54 bushel. They bring in intense management, so that's going to be your foliar fertilizer. That's going to be your foliar fungicide, the seed treatments, everything else added to it, right? Still on 30-inch rows. You increase yield how much? 2 bushel. What happens on the third bar there? It's narrow planting, so 15s are what we're talking about, give or take, right? Planted timely, naked seed. 56 and change. Not doing anything else with silver bullets through the growing season, just being agronomically smart, right? Narrow rows, planted timely, naked seed, you're good to go. Now, if you want to start to build on that, have some synergies, if you will. The intense management, and the fallacy of this is that you can't break apart what part of that, but still the concept of being a little bit more intense or a little higher level management, it goes from the 56 and change to not 58, not 59, but nearly 61. Okay? It's not a 2 bushel change, it's more a 5 bushel change. Okay, so again, the synergy of in-season management with the narrow rows planted timely. Okay, you guys follow that? So again, trying to think about being productive as well as profitable. Okay? Continuing down the road of this planting date effect. The node development, this is huge. This is a huge part of this effect. If you've got the nodes, so main leaf attachment points, you're going to have the opportunity to fill those pods that are associated with them. The vast majority of our plant sugars that are going into our pods are coming from the leaves that are attached to those main stem areas, right? Planting date effect, normally you're kind of flat line until middle of May, so 19, 20 nodes on this study, then it drops off, right? 30th of May down to 17. First week of June, we're down to 15. Okay? So what do you guys do in the first week of June if that's your planting date? What do you recommend, or what do you do if you're the farmer? You're bumping your seeding rate, right? And there's for good reason. This is one of the main reasons, right? You have fewer nodes on the individual plants, so you better put more nodes out there, i.e. have more plants with fewer nodes to try to make up some of that yield difference, as well as get a canopy closed by the time you're thinking about weed control, right? That's why we make that change. My recommendation is if, let's say, you're at the 140,000 seeding rate, 15-inch planters, so again, that's a kind of easy place to start. You stay that through the month of May. You get the first week of June, you're increasing that sucker 10 to 15,000 seeds. You're doing that every week after that in June. Every continual week after that, you get that delay. It's another 10 to 15,000 seed increase. Okay. I've had timely planted, so these late Aprils, early Mays. We typically have 18 to 20 nodes. You guys have similar numbers. Timely planted, I've had 24 noded plants. Okay, again, 4 to 6 more nodes. Same variety, just planted timely. Right? It's how it's accumulating this heat units, this thermal energy, before it gets pushed into reproduction. All right? Some people say, well, 24 noded plants versus my 20, isn't that going to be up to your chest? No, those nodes at the bottom, that early development, they're going to be so stacked. I mean, they're going to be extremely stacked. They'll be a quarter inch, half inch at best. on those initial ones. So you're not getting this huge bump in terms of internodal elongation. You're getting more node development, so you have a little bit better light penetration down the canopy as well as the reproductive branches. Okay? And just so you follow the pod numbers, that same trend. Flat line, mid-May drops off. Again, it's following the node development. Okay? This is just one example of how we do have varietal difference to planting date. All right, just to kind of give you the idea that over a couple of years, we've got one variety the first week of May. Highest yields were there, continued linear decrease. And then we got 3 other varieties. Again, it's not quite as good of a fit as it should be, but about the 20th of May, then it drops off. Okay? So again, for us, usually late April, early May is a good sweet spot to be. But again, there are going to be varieties that respond more favorably to timely planted with a straight linear decrease after the fact. Okay? Any ideas when half of the Indiana soybean crop is planted? What date? I haven't looked up Ohio's. Maybe they're got a better extension agronomist. No? No. Okay. Half of Indiana soybeans are planted by the 20th of May. You know what that means? The other half ain't. Right? So if you want to think about yield potential and you're not planting until after the 20th of May, and assuming field conditions are fit, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. Okay? Again, I don't want to belabor it, but I do want to belabor it. So, all right. Kind of switching a little bit to go into the whys this really occurs. Here's another layer of that, right? You know, we don't talk about heat units really in soybeans that often. This reproductive duration, this just happens to be 1 year. Time from R3 to R7. So R3 is going to be what stage? First pod, right? Right. R7, you're starting to drop the leaves, first signs of maturity, right? So that major reproductive window, that duration, right? Pod development, seed fill. All right, so timely planted, May 7th, that was the earliest we could get in 2015 that year. 55 calendar days, all right. A couple weeks later, 22nd of May, 54. Well, Shaun, that's only one calendar day. That's not going to be that big of a difference. Are those calendar days created equal? You know, are they experiencing the same amount of sunlight, same amount of temperature? No, they're not. And so one way I'm trying to express this is heat units alone, right? Over 1,200 heat units during that period, under 1150. I could put solar radiation up there, but I think I really would get some crickets starting to come around when I say megajoules, right? So I think you guys have appreciation for heat units. So you have a longer duration for heat unit accumulation. Calendar day, certainly whenever you get into June, I think everyone has that appreciation. That's pretty short window, right? This is probably one of my favorite slides in terms of this kind of talk on planting date, is to look at the hours of sunlight, all right? Again, more appropriate is really solar radiation interception megajoules, but, you know, this gets the point across. Our longest day of the year is what day? June 21st, right? So ideally, it makes sense theoretically, let's get that canopy closed, let's get flowering by the 20th, 21st of June, and start harvesting all that sunlight, right? That makes a lot of sense theoretically. We just can't pull that off, right? I showed one set of the March 30th means they got there, but you know, our yield differences aren't playing out there. All right, so it really comes down to that first week of July. That's when we need to get canopied R2, full bloom. I've got a little bit of the latitude effect, so we got the black being our northeast farm, acres our west central, and then southeast, obviously southeast, right? So you catch latitude effect, longest day of the year. Here's the planting date scenario. So we've got it when we planted it, when we hit a few of these key growth stages, when we hit R1, when we hit R3, and whenever we're starting to mature or we're starting to drop those leaves, right? So May 7th, again, the year that we had, that's the earliest we could get out. So timely planted, reached R1 about 30th of June. A day or two later, 3 days later, we're at R2. So we're about as high as we can get in terms of light interception, right? And then we're maintaining that. We're harvesting that sunlight. May 22nd, 4th of June, 24th of June, 6th of July. So obviously you guys have the appreciation. It's later planting, so it's getting shifted. But you're also shifting when you're reaching those flowering points, when you're reaching those potting points. So that's one major side of that, right? So a calendar day is not equal, right? A June 15th is totally different than a July 15th, all right? And then the other side of that is hopefully you start to see that those are coming together as well, right? So it's not just they're getting there later, but they're coming together. There's less time in those reproductive periods. So again, you're selling yourself short. Less seed fill rate usually too. Okay? Any questions on the timely planting and how that really does play out for us? Again, just being intentional with that to gain the yield potential so that we can be more profitable. Any questions? Okay, I'll move on. So this is kind of a fun one. 2015, we had a lot of rain. I don't know if you guys did or not, right? I think there's a lot of train rains, right? That train of rain. So up in the north central part of our state, we had a site, we had areas that got 20 inches of rain in June. 30 inches were the highest numbers I heard. Okay, this particular field is another one of our farms. 20 inches of rain in June is what we got. It's a black sand, about 2.5% organic matter, but it's a sand, right? And so the idea was, what can we do to bring these soybeans back to life? Was the idea, right? They're saturated conditions. They were never ponded. We had plenty of that, but these fields, had enough infiltration, percolation that they never ponded, but they were saturated conditions. So this is the exact same field, 100 foot apart. What growth stage is these beans on top? Any idea? Give me a guess. V2? Maybe V3? Okay. What about the bottom beans? V4, R1 even? They're the exact same growth stage. V4. Exact same growth stage. What happens in saturated conditions? You push out oxygen, right? All right? And you effectively create almost a drought condition, hang with me, in saturated conditions because the roots start to die. They use up the oxygen for respiration. No more oxygen, they start to die. So what are these plants doing right now? They're dropping their oldest leaves, just like your corn does whenever it starts to fire, right? That's the exact same thing that occurred here. They're both V4, so 4 trifoliate positions. They don't have all their 4 trifoliates anymore, right? So I'll give you that. Growth stage, they are still a V4. So the idea is, what can we do to bring these poor, pitiful beans, we call the rescue beans, V4, up to something close to this happy bean. My crew like to call them happy beans, right? I feel like I was doing an ad for California Dairy or something. Happy beans, right? Fair Oaks isn't too far away, all right? So the idea is, what can we do? We had enough room for 18 treatments in the rescue study. In other words, we had a lot of crappy beans. I only had room for 8 treatments in the healthy beans, the happy beans, all right? So saturated conditions, we're kind of thinking through probably limited nodulation, limited fixation. So a lot of those issues on nitrogen supply. So that was a heavy hitter for a number of our treatments. We brought in some of the PGRs that are promoted to look at indole-acetic acid, IAA, so root development, initiation, some plant hormones, some fungicides, all that coming into play. This doesn't do too bad. Sometimes these slides are hard with the projector, but our ammonium sulfate treatment, again, I was targeting nitrogen, 20 pounds of nitrogen. We have a greening effect, so more chlorophyll content. Our urea treatments, just to the side, this just happens to be a side-by-side, had 40 pounds of nitrogen. We did do a little bit better job in terms of node development, reproductive, but we weren't there in terms of chlorophyll content or nitrogen content. But more importantly, here's where the yields played out. Okay? So only 2 treatments pulled out. All right, again, this was a rescue study, one site, just playing with it. We've got all these green are the nitrogen components. So untreated control at the end of the season on that rescue study was 50 bushel. Okay? I brought in these components for broadcast, that same stage, that July 2nd picture I showed you, the V4. That's when we made these applications. We did 40 pounds of nitrogen as urea, 20 pounds as nitrogen as urea. Didn't do a bloody thing for us. 20 pounds of nitrogen using AMS, ammonium sulfate, about a 6-7 bushel bump. The next few are actually foliar treatments. So I tried to dissolve 10 pounds of nitrogen via AMS and then apply. It got kind of grainy. I don't think we actually reached the 10-pound rate. It was probably more like a 7-pound rate is what we effectively sprayed. Coron had theirs out there. We did get the target of 10 pounds of nitrogen, UAN diluted 10 pounds. Again, those weren't playing out. Those are 2 ammonium sulfate treatments. All right. Any of these other, blues are kind of these individual task force or manganese or some of the fungicides. some of the PGRs and combinations, long story short, they didn't do anything, right? But the sulfur did. And so I think if sulfur response, wheat's going to be number 1, corn's going to be number 2, soybeans isn't even on my list. Okay? So I thought it was an anomaly of 2015. Emerson showed a little bit of throwing in some ammonium sulfate on his studies on the nitrogen side. And so we did it again in 2016. Same 800 acre farm. Did 3 different studies. All right. Oh, by the way, the rescue beans did get up to the same yield level as happy beans. Okay. It was a sulfur deficiency that was playing out. Oh, there we go. So here's 2016 now. Doing a conservative, straight-out sulfur study on this black sand. Okay. You catch anything different between those 2 pictures? I didn't doctor these. Okay. So as we walked the farm, right, we had small plots on this because we're doing pretty intensive study. 3 different studies, 13 odd treatments or so. So couldn't do it field scale. Walked the farm. Soybeans, they looked okay. Nothing really tripped my trigger. And then I came over to our study. And every single plot that has some sulfur treatment, I'm showing the 20 pounds of sulfur up front, was nice dark green. And the other ones were showing the highlighter green. Okay, I wouldn't have thought a whole lot about it. We've got varieties that kind of show that off green color, right? Sulfur, it moves through the soil, right? It's mobile in the soil just like nitrate. Sulfate moves through the soil. So you can only do so much with a soil test. It helps give you a little bit of a guidance, right? It's a maleic extraction for most of these labs. Maleic 3. It gives you a decent, rough idea. But I was upwards of 2.5% organic matter. I thought, surely not. Surely it's not going to be a problem. June this year, we had great weather, good temperatures, nothing popped. These differences didn't pop until about July, middle of July. Okay? So here's how it is. And this is the one that everyone has fun with. We got a 12 bushel response. Okay? I'll lay it out. Untreated control was 48 bushel at the end of our 2016 season. We did 2 broadcast applications. I want to do ahead of planting, but the tenant planted it before we get there, so it was within a couple, 2 or 3 days of planting before emergence, but it was broadcast on top of the ground, nothing else. Mother Nature worked it in for us. All right. This Mez 10 is a Mosaics product, right? It's their 1240 10S. It is not their Mez with a Z on the end. It's not the zinc form. I took that out of the equation. I used just their Mez 10. So looking at sulfur source of Mez 10, ammonium sulfate, again, that's just a broadcast grade. It's not your spray grade. So we get a nice increase, 12 bushel, very substantial. Again, I didn't anticipate seeing that kind of a yield response. Any guesses why the Mez 10 wasn't quite as good? Okay, yes, it steps up. You've got A, B, C, and A. Okay, yes, statistically they are exact same. But go through the thought process of why it might be just a tick lower. Exactly, right? So if you know anything about that, half of the sulfur is elemental sulfur, the other half is ammonium sulfate, right? Concept makes a lot of sense, right? Elemental sulfur oxidizes, so you've got to supply over the growing season. So what does that potentially tell you about if there is going to be sulfur issues in soybeans? If, okay, I'm not broadcasting that we're going to see deficiencies everywhere, but I'm documenting this. If we're going to see sulfur deficiencies, when do they need to be corrected? What is that telling you? Early, right? Early vegetative growth. Next few bars are going to show the foliar response. So these were broadcast, all right? Everything else to the right, the blues and the pinks, are all a foliar treatment. Our target was 5 pounds of sulfur. I used ammonium sulfate spray grade, right? And then we applied it at 15 gallons per acre. Target are the growth stages you see at the bottom. V4, R2, R4, R6. So what's interesting about this on those singles, just 5 pounds of sulfur, was going from the 48 bushel, right, untreated control, going up to about the 55, 56, and fairly consistent with any of those single applications. All right, so it's saying that, well, if you got a sulfur deficient field, you can probably still make up, even as late as R6, some of the yield. You're not making up all of it, right? We didn't go up to 60 bushel. We gained the 6 or 7 bushel, 8 bushel maybe, not the 12 bushel. Now, whenever we go into the sequential scenario, a V4 plus an R2, so that's 5 pounds of sulfur at V4, another 5 pounds of sulfur at R2, foliar spray, puts us back up to the 60 bushel mark. Okay? So again, it's going back to making the case, if there's going to be issues in sulfur in soybeans, probably needs to be corrected on the early side. Right? Vegetative, early, reproductive. Okay? Think about why that is. You think about plant material photosynthetic factory, chlorophyll content. You also look at nodules and building that supply. So it all kind of makes sense why that comes into play. We're expanding this again. I was looking for it after 2015. I was like, okay, let's really look and see if there is sulfur. Now we've documented, so we're going across the state just kind of picking out a few of these treatments to see, okay, how widespread is this really? Okay, so catch that. I'm sharing that's kind of fun to show we got a 12 bushel response, but I'm saying you got to spend more money now, right? But that's not on every acre, so that's the next step. All right, so hopefully you hear me loud and clear on that. And then the final point on this sulfur study that I'm showing today, I've got other ones to play around with too. You've got these R4, R6, you got all 4 timings. You actually have no yield difference between it and the untreated control, right? Keeps on going down. Anyone hear Emerson's talk this morning? All right, what did he say about AMS? Well, it doesn't work with the studies that he showed, so I agree with that. That's right. It can burn the leaves, right? You got to do, so you got to be smart about it. So dew on the leaves for one, or 95 degrees in the afternoon ain't a good time either. Okay, so we're going down the route this coming year. We'll look at gypsum as a sulfur source in addition to these upfronts. And then I played with KTS, so potassium thiosulfate. I did it as an R5. We still saw a 7 to 8 bushel gain on that side of things as well. So there are some other products to start playing around with. Okay? Any questions on the sulfur studies? Response? Yes, Ed? This is a black sand, yep. So about 2.5% organic matter. Again, I thought that we'd have plenty of organic matter mineralization when we did it. 1 second. What's that? We're going that route this coming year. So again, this is a one and looking for it very intensely. Now that we found it, let's start expanding. So gypsum was not used. It's going to be used this coming year. I've used gypsum in our wheat studies where we've seen sulfur response in southwestern Indiana. It's a great source for sulfur. I don't anticipate having any real difference between it and ammonium sulfate up front. So I'm going to use it this coming year, and we'll see how it performs. Again, as a sulfur source. Here's the take-homes again. Okay. Thinking about this, we want to be varieties that really make sense. Yield potential, yield consistency, timely planting, seed treatments, fungicide's a good spot to be. Seed rates, again, we can be 100,000 and plenty good, and we can go even lower. Okay. I'll make one little ad campaign. Our corn soybean field guide, and you guys, most of you have experienced that in the handout, the pocket guide version. We did an iPad version a number of years ago. We finally get to the point that next week they're being released for the iPhone and the Android. Both platforms next week they'll be available. They'll be as a soybean field scout is how we've called it, and then the corn field scout. And within those, the typical growth stages you've talked about and used over the years, but then also calculators. So we've got the seeding rate, we've got replant calculators, we got nitrogen calculators. So it's been a long process, but we're finally getting to the point. It's at Apple right now to get approved and out the door next week.